Hayop kang matandang hukluban ka. Akala mo kung sino kang umasta dito sa lupa namin? Baka nakakalimutan mo, isang hamak dito magsasakay lang dito. The words, sharp as shattered glass, ripped through the humid afternoon air, making Ara Alcantara freeze mid-sentence. Katatapos lang niyang isave ang final draft ng thesis niya sa isang luma at maingay na computer shop sa bayan. Her father, Mang Cardo, was supposed to meet her here para sabay na silang umuwi sakay ng jeepney. Pero yung boses na iyon na puno ng pagmamataas at galit kilalang kilala niya. Doña Lucinda Montemayor. Ang may-ari ng malawak na hacienda kung saan nagsasaka ang tatay niya at ang kuya niya, at kung saan nakatirik ang maliit nilang bahay na minana pa ni Ara sa kanyang yumaong ina. Dali-daling lumabas si Ara ng computer shop, yung kaba sa dibdib niya, parang drum na walang tigil sa pagpukpok. And there, sa tapat ng municipal hall, under the scorching sun, was the scene that would forever be seared into her memory. Her father, Mang Cardo, a man she respected more than anyone in the world, was kneeling on the dusty ground, his head bowed, his worn sombrero clutched in his trembling hands. At sa harap niya, nakatayo si Doña Lucinda, resplendent in her expensive silk dress and oversized sunglasses, her face a mask of fury, her voice booming as she continued her tirade. Ilang beses ko nang sinabi sa'yo, Cardo, na ayoko nang makita iyang pagmumukha ng panganay mong basagulero sa hacienda ko. But what do? You cuddle him. You protect him. Dahil ba sa utang na loob mo sa akin, akala mo pwede mo nang abusuhin ang kabaitan ko? Ara felt her blood boil. Her Kuya Miguel, while admittedly a bit hot-headed sometimes, was not tiki basagulero. He had simply tried to reason with Doña Lucinda's abusive encargado who was shortchanging the farmers. And now, her father was paying the price. The humiliation, the injustice, it was too much. Itay, sigaw ni Ara, akmang lalapit, pero pinigilan siya ng ilang mga usyosong nakapalibot. Doña Lucinda's sharp gaze snapped towards Ara. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before it hardened again. Ah, the bright scholar, she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Anak ka nga ng ama mo. Parehong matigas ang ulo. She then turned back to Mang Cardo. Consider this your final warning, Cardo. One more misstep from your family and all of you are out. Eh, naiintindihan mo? Mang Cardo could only nod, his shoulders lump in defeat. Ara wanted to scream, to fight, to defend her father. Pero alam niyang wala siyang laban sa kapangyarihan ni Doña Lucinda. The Montemayor's owned half the town, it seemed. Later that evening, after a tense and mostly silent dinner, a sleek black car pulled up in front of their humble nipa hut. Isa sa mga tauhan ni Doña Lucinda ang bumaba. Pinapatawag po kayo ni Doña Lucinda sa mansyon, Ara. Ikaw lang daw po. Ara's stomach churned with a mixture of galit and gulat. Bakit siya? Anong kailangan sa kanya ng matapobreng donya? The Montemayor mansion was as imposing as its owner. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, antique furniture that probably cost more than their entire year's harvest. Ara felt small and out of place in her simple t-shirt and faded jeans. She was led to a lavish receiving room where Doña Lucinda sat on a velvet armchair, sipping tea like a queen on her throne. And beside her, standing stiffly beside the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens, was a man Ara knew all too well. Kian Montemayor. Doña Lucinda's only son. Her former professor in an elective subject 2 years ago. The man she used to fear and loathe in equal measure. Professor Kian, as he was known then, was brilliant, yes, but also notoriously cold, aloof, and unapproachable. He rarely smiled. His lectures were monotonously precise, and he seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from giving impossibly difficult exams. Ara had barely passed his subject, vowing never to cross paths with him again if she could help it. And now, here he was. Taller, leaner, his features sharper, more defined. He still had that same brooding intensity, that same unreadable expression. He glanced at Ara briefly, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, before turning back to the window. Walang emosyon. Parang hangin lang si Ara na dumaan. Ara Alcantara, Doña Lucinda began, her voice deceptively sweet. I'm glad you could make it, tea. Ano po ang kailangan niyo sa akin, Doña Lucinda? Ara asked, trying to keep her voice steady, trying to ignore the way Ken's presence made her skin prickle. Straight to the point, I like that, Doña Lucinda said with a thin smile. As you know, your family situation on Invi land is precarious. Your father's incompetence, your brother's insolence, it's all becoming quite tiresome. Ara bristled. If my father is not incompetent, and if the brother was just. Silence. Doña Lucinda snapped, her sweet demeanor vanishing. I am not here to debate with you, child. I am here to offer you a solution. She paused, savoring the moment. A way for your family to keep their jobs, their home. A way for you to secure your future. Ara waited, her heart pounding with dreadful premonition. Doña Lucinda gestured towards Kian. In-law's son, Kian, needs a wife. Ara's jaw dropped. What? Nananaginip ba siya? This had to be some kind of sick joke. He needs a wife who is presentable, educated enough, and most importantly, someone he can control, Doña Lucinda continued, her eyes glinting. Someone who will not cause him any distractions. Someone like you, Ara. Ara stared at Doña Lucinda, then at Kian, who still hadn't turned around, his back ramrod straight. Gulat. Pure, unadulterated shock rendered her speechless. You will marry Invi's son, Doña Lucinda declared, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In exchange, I will overlook your family's transgressions. I will even finance the remainder of your studies, perhaps even send you for further education abroad, if you prove to be a cooperative wife. Tears welled up in Ara's eyes. Tears of anger, of humiliation. Hindi po ako papayag, she choked out. Hindi ako magpapakasal sa anak niyo para lang sa lupa at pera. Hindi kami desperado. Doña Lucinda chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. Oh, but you are, my dear. You just don't know it yet. She leaned forward. Think about your father, Ara. His health is not what it used to be. Can he handle the stress of eviction, of starting over? Think about your brother. With his reputation, who else would hire him? And your precious disease, your dreams of helping your community, how will you achieve those if you're homeless and penniless? Each word was a dagger to Ara's heart. Doña Lucinda knew exactly where to strike. Ara looked at Kian, pleading for him to say something, anything. To object, to refuse this insane proposal. But he remained silent, his back still to her, a cold, unmoving statue. Did he agree with this? Was he also a party to this cruel manipulation? The choice is yours, Ara, Doña Lucinda said, standing up, signaling the end of their audience. Marry Kian, and your family is safe. Refuse, and well. I'm sure you can imagine the consequences. I'll give you until tomorrow morning to decide. Ara stumbled out of the mansion, her mind reeling, her heart shattered. Marry Kian Montemayor. The cold, arrogant professor she despised. It was unthinkable. Impossible. But as she walked home under the starlit Doña Lucinda's words echoed in her mind. Her father's weary face, her brother's frustrated anger, her own dreams slowly turning to dust. The next morning, just as the sun was beginning to rise, Mancardo received a formal eviction notice from Doña Lucinda. They had 1 week to vacate the land they had tilled for generations. 1 week to find new home, new livelihood. Ara looked at the eviction notice, then at her father's devastated face, then at her younger sister, Anna, who was crying silently in a corner. The weight of their impending doom pressed down on her. Galit. Gulat. Desperation. Later that day, Ara found herself back at the Montemayor mansion, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her spirit crushed. Doña Lucinda was waiting, triumphant smirk on her face. Kian was there too, still silent, still unreadable. So, Ara, Doña Lucinda purred. What is your decision? Ara took deep, shaky breath. She looked at Kyan, searching for any sign of humanity, any flicker of protest. There was none. His face was a blank mask. Pumapayag na po ako, Ara whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Pumapayag na po akong magpakasal sa anak niyo. Doña Lucinda's smirk widened. Excellent. A wise choice. Ara's gaze lingered on Kyan. Pumayag ka dahil sa utang na loob ng pamilya mo sa amin? O may iba pa? The question burned in her mind, but she didn't dare voice it. For now, she was trapped. Trapped DI debt, DI duty, DI deal with the devil herself. And the devil's son he just stood there, watching her with those cold, empty eyes. Or were they? For a split second, Ara thought she saw something else flicker in their depths. Regret? Resignation? Or was it just a reflection of her own despair? The answer, she knew, would unravel in the difficult days to come. But one thing was certain, her life, as she knew it, was over. The engagement was a whirlwind of forced smiles and suffocating obligations. Parang pelikula na hindi si Ara ang bida, kundi isang extra na napilitan lang umarte. Doña Lucinda, ever the meticulous puppet master, orchestrated everything. From the ridiculously expensive and uncomfortable engagement dress Ara was forced to wear for the small, intimate family dinner, which turned out to be gathering of Doña Lucinda's equally snooty amigas, to the carefully worded announcements in local papers that painted Ara as a promising young scholar from a humble background, fortunate enough to capture the heart of the Montemayor here. Fortunate. Ara almost choked on her water when she read that. Kung alam lang nila. Kyan, her defiant, was a ghost throughout the preparations. He was physically present, yes, but emotionally, he was a million miles away. He'd nod at the right times, offer curt, almost robotic response when spoken to, but his eyes were always distant, guarded. Para siyang estatwa, gwapo nga, pero walang buhay. Ara found herself oscillating between simmering anger at his passivity and a strange, reluctant curiosity about the man behind the impenetrable facade. The fitting for the engagement dress was pure torture. Doña Lucinda had summoned renowned Manila-based designer. Habang sinusukatan si Ara, panay ang pintas ni Doña Lucinda. Her shoulders are too broad for that cut. That color makes her look salaw. Make sure her provincial look is thoroughly disguised. Ara just stood there, feeling like a mannequin, biting back her retorts. Si Kian, nakaupo sa isang sulok, flipping through a thick academic journal, seemingly oblivious. Pero minsan, nahuhuli ni Ara ang sulyap niya, the quick, almost imperceptible glance before his eyes darted back to his book. Anong iniisip niya? Disgust? Pity? Or something else entirely? Their silent dinners with Doña Lucinda were even worse. The Doña would dominate the conversation, mostly bragging about Kian's achievements or her latest charity project, which Ara suspected was more for show than actual charity. Kian would eat in silence, occasionally offering a monosyllabic reply. Ara would pick at her food, the expensive cuisine tasting like cardboard in her mouth. Ang tanging comfort lang niya ay ang pag-iisip na ang pamilya niya, at least for now, ay ligtas sa pagmamalupit ni Doña Lucinda. The eviction notice had been graciously rescinded. Her father and brother were allowed to continue working, albeit under stricter supervision. One late afternoon, after another suffocating planning session, with Doña Lucinda for an upcoming engagement party Ara didn't even want, Kian was tasked to drive Ara home. Usually, may driver sila. But today, Doña Lucinda insisted Kian do it himself, para naman masanay na kayo sa isa't isa, no? You need to at least look like a couple. The car ride was excruciatingly awkward. Walang imikan. Ang tanging maririnig lang ay ang humuhuning makina ng sasakyan at ang malakas na kabog ng dibdib ni Ara. She stared out the window, watching the familiar rice paddies blur past, feeling like a prisoner being transported. Then, unexpectedly, the area opened up. Bumuhos ang malakas na ulan, the kind that blurred the windshield and made driving difficult. Damn it, Kian muttered under his breath, the first actual emotion Ara had heard from him all day. He pulled over to the side of the road, a little too abruptly, making Ara jump. May problema ba? Ara asked, her voice barely a whisper. The wipers are busted, Kyan said, his voice tight with annoyance. And this rain, it looks like it's not going to stop anytime soon. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly. For a split second, he looked less like the cold professor and more like frustrated, normal guy. They sat there in silence for a few more minutes, the rain drumming relentless tequila on the car roof. Ara shivered slightly. The air conditioning was too cold. We can't stay here all night, Kyan finally said. The next town is about a 5-kilometer walk. May bus terminal doon. We can take a bus. Maglalakad tayo sa ulan? Ara asked, incredulous. Si Kyan Montemayor maglalakad sa ulan at putik. Unless you have a better idea, he retorted, a hint of his old, sarcastic professor tone creeping in. Wala. So, they got out of the car. Kyan grabbed a single, large black umbrella from the trunk. Isa lang. Of course. The walk was an experience. The umbrella was big, but not big enough to shield them both completely, especially with the wind whipping the rain sideways. They had to walk close, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Ara could feel the warmth radiating from Kyan's arm, a stark contrast to the cold rain soaking her thin blouse. Ang bango niya, napansin ni Ara. Not the usual strong cologne of rich men, but a subtle, clean scent, like expensive soap and old books. It was distracting. Kasalanan to ng nanay mo, Ara muttered under her breath, more to herself than to Kyan, as a particularly strong gust of wind nearly snatched the umbrella from Kyan's grasp. To her surprise, Kyan chuckled. Real, actual chuckle. You think I don't know that, he said, his voice surprisingly human. My mother has a knack for orchestrating disasters. Ara glanced at him. In the dim light of the stormy afternoon, with his hair damp and a stray lock falling across his forehead, he looked different. Younger. More vulnerable. Less like that Montemayor here and more like. Kyan. Bakit ka pumayag dito, Kyan? Ara found herself asking, the question slipping out before she could stop it, sa kasal na to. You could have said no, you're her son. Kyan was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the muddy path ahead. Walang pumipili ng kapalaran, Ara, he finally said, his voice quiet, tinged with a sadness that surprised her. Sometimes, we're all just pawns in someone else's game. Even her son. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ara looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not just the cold professor or the arrogant here, but a man who was also trapped. Trapped by his mother, by his name, by expectations he probably never wanted. Nagpatuloy sila sa paglalakad, the shared discomfort of the rain and the muddy road creating a strange, unwilling sort of camaraderie between them. When they finally reached the small, bustling bus terminal, basang-basa na sila at nanlalamig. The bus ride was another kind of awkward. Punuan. They ended up sitting beside each other, their damp clothes making the vinyl seats feel sticky. Pia, for once, wasn't there to act as a buffer. It was just them. Ara hugged herself, trying to stop shivering. Kyan, beside her, was staring out the window, his expression unreadable again. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he shrugged off his suit jacket, an expensive-looking, now thoroughly soaked, suit jacket, and draped it over Ara's shoulders. Ara stared at him, gulat. Kyan ni. You're shivering, he said simply, not looking at her. Baka magkasakit ka. My mother would never forgive me if her future daughter-in-law caught a cold before the engagement party. The sarcasm was back, but there was something else in his tone too. Concern? The jacket was surprisingly warm, and it smelled faintly of him. Ara pulled it tighter around her, a strange feeling fluttering in her chest. Tampuhan. Curiosity. And something else she couldn't quite name. When they finally reached Ara's stop, medyo tumila na ang ulan. As Ara was about to get off the bus, Kyan spoke. Ara, he said, his voice low. About what I said earlier. Walang pumipili ng kapalaran. I meant it, T. He finally looked at her, his eyes holding depth of emotion she hadn't seen before. We're both in this, whether we like it or not. Let's just tear aside to get through it, see. Ara didn't know what to say. She just nodded and hurried off the bus, Kyan's jacket still around her shoulders. That night, as she lay in her banig, listening to the sound of the lingering rain, Ara couldn't stop thinking about Kyan. The Kyan who chuckled, the Kyan who sounded sad, the Kyan who gave her his jacket. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than met the eye. A few days later, Ara was passing beside the library in the Montemayor mansion. Doña Lucinda had, graciously, allowed her access for her studies, when she overheard raised voices from inside Kyan's private study. It was Kyan and Doña Lucinda. And they were arguing. I told you, Mother, I don't want a lavish party. Kyan's voice was sharp, laced with a frustration Ara had never heard him direct at his mother before. This whole engagement is already a farce. Must you parade us around like prize-winning cattle? Kyan, how dare you speak to me that way? Doña Lucinda's voice was equally shrill. This party is necessary. It's for our image. For the family. And you will do as I say. You will smile, you will be charming, and you will act like you are madly in love with that farmer's daughter. Madly in love. Kyan loved, a harsh, bitter sound. You're asking for a miracle, Mother. I can barely stand to be in the same room as her without feeling like I'm suffocating. Ara's heart clenched. He can barely stand to be in the same room as her. The words were like a slap in the face. So, all that the jacket, the brief moments of perceived vulnerability, was that all an act too? Or was he just as miserable as she was, lashing out in his own way? She didn't wait to hear more. Mabilis siyang umalis, yung mga salita ni Kyan na umuulit-ulit sa isip niya. The curiosity she had started to feel was now tinged with a familiar anger and a fresh wave of helplessness. Walang pumipili ng kapalaran. Maybe Kyan was right. But his fate, it seemed, was to despise the woman he was forced to marry. And her fate? To be that woman. The upcoming engagement party felt less like celebration and more like public execution of her freedom. And Kyan? Kyan was both her reluctant executioner and a fellow prisoner. Ang gulo. Ang sakit. The words Kyan had hurled during his argument with Doña Lucinda, "I can barely stand to be in the same room as her without feeling like I'm suffocating," played on a loop in Ara's mind. Masakit. It confirmed her worst fears, he despised her. Yung mga mumunting moments of perceived connection, yung pag-aalala sa bus, yung jacket, baka nga ilusyon niya lang lahat yun. O baka naman, Kyan was just a very good actor, forced by his mother to play a role. Despite the sting, Ara couldn't shake off nagging feeling. There was something more to Kyan's misery, something beyond just being forced into an unwanted marriage. At may kinalaman ba ito sa pamilya niya? Sa nakaraan? One afternoon, while Doña Lucinda was out attending one of her charity luncheons and Kyan was supposedly holed up in his study, Ara found herself drawn to the old, dusty section of the Montemayor library. Dito nakatago yung mga lumang photo albums at family records. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, just a gut feeling, desperate need for answers. Flipping through a brittle, leather-bound album, she saw pictures of a younger Doña Lucinda, surprisingly less stern, almost happy. And then, a photo that made her heart stop. It was the picture of her mother, Elena Alcantara, much younger, smiling irreverently, standing beside a younger, equally serious-looking Kyan. They were in what looked like the Montemayor Gardens. Her mother was wearing a simple uniform, like that of a household staff. Her mother worked for the Montemayors. Hindi ito naikwento sa kanya ng itay niya. All she knew was that her mother had passed away from sudden illness when Ara was just a child. Her hands trembled as she searched for more clues. Sa ilalim ng isang tumpok ng mga lumang dokumento, she found an old employment ledger. And there it was, Elena Alcantara. Position, personal alalay to young Master Ken. Employed, date. Terminated, date, reason, gross negligence leading to an accident involving Master Ken. Gross negligence. An accident involving Ken? What accident? Bakit hindi niya to alam? A wave of pagdududa and lungkot washed over Ara. Her mother, a kind and gentle woman from her faint childhood memories, accused of negligence. It didn't make sense. At bakit ito inilihim sa kanya ng tatay niya? She needed to talk to Kayan. Found him in his study, not reading, but staring blankly at complex architectural blueprint on his desk. The room smelled of coffee and the faint, metallic scent of drafting tools. Kayan, Ara said, her voice barely above a whisper, holding the old photo. He looked up, his eyes guarded as usual. What is it, Ara? Yun, mother, Ara began, her voice shaking. She worked here, didn't she? She was your alalay? Kayan's expression didn't change, but Ara saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. Yes, he replied, his voice flat. A long time ago. Anong nangyari sa kanya, Kayan? Ara pressed, stepping closer. The record said she was terminated because of gross negligence. An accident involving you. What accident? Kayan stood up, turning his back to her, much like he did on the day of the proposal. It's none of your concern, Ara. It was in the past. Let it stay there. None of your concern. Ara's voice rose, fueled by years of unspoken grief and a new, burning sense of injustice. It's about the mother, Kayan. The mother barely knew. The mother the father never talks about. May alam ka bang hindi ko alam? Tell me. Kayan remained silent, his shoulders rigid. Was she really negligent? Ara pleaded, tears welling up. Or was that just an excuse? Pinagmalupitan ba siya ng nanay mo? Is that why she left? Is that why father never speaks of her time here? Still, silence. Frustration and anger warred with desperate need for answers. This man, this cold, distant man she was forced to marry, held piece of her past, piece of her mother, and he was refusing to share it. Suddenly, Ara's phone rang, shattering the tense silence. It was her Kuya Miguel, his voice frantic. Ara! Si Itay. Inatake sa puso. Nandito kami ngayon sa bukid, dinala namin siya sa maliit na klinik, pero kailangan daw dalhin sa ospital sa bayan. Ara's blood ran cold. Ano? Sige, kuya, papunta na ako. She hung up, her face pale with panic. Si Itay inatake sa puso. Without second thought, Kayan turned around. The cold mask was gone, replaced by a look of genuine concern. Where is he? Sa klinik daw malapit sa bukid. They need to transfer him to the town hospital, Ara said, her voice trembling. Let's go, Kayan said, grabbing his car keys. I'll drive. The Kayan who drove them to the hospital was not the cold professor or the reluctant Fianc. He was focused, efficient, and surprisingly gentle. He navigated the raw farm roads with a skill that surprised Ara. He asked calm, pertinent questions about her father's condition. He even managed to offer few words of reassurance to a distraught Ara. When they reached the small, under-equipped rural clinic, Mancardo was pale and weak, but conscious. Kuya Miguel looked frantic. The local doctor explained that Mancardo had suffered a mild heart attack, likely due to stress and exhaustion. He needed better medical facilities, immediately. I'll take care of the transfer and the hospital bills, Kayan stated, already on his phone, making arrangements with private hospital in the nearby city, pulling strings Ara never knew he had. He didn't consult Doña Lucinda. He just did it. While waiting for the ambulance Kayan had arranged, Ara watched him. He spoke quietly with the local doctor, his questions intelligent, his demeanor respectful. He even managed to get a weak smile from Mang Cardo with a softly spoken, "Magpagaling po kayo, Mang Cardo. Ara needs you." This was a Kayan she had never seen before. Caring. Competent. Almost kind. The transfer to the city hospital was swift. Kayan handled all the admissions paperwork, his presence commanding a level of efficiency Ara knew her family could never have achieved on their own. He made sure Mang Cardo was settled into a private room, with the best cardiologist on call. Later, as Ara and Kuya Miguel sat in the sterile, quiet hospital hallway, waiting for updates, Kayan joined them. He handed Ara a cup of coffee and a sandwich. "You need to eat," he said, his voice soft. Ara looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Salamat, Kayan," she whispered. "Salamat sa lahat. Hindi ko alam kung anong gagawin namin kung wala ka." The words were genuine, heartfelt. The anger and suspicion from earlier were momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. Kayan just nodded, looking uncomfortable with her thanks. He sat beside her, not too close, but not too far either. An awkward silence settled between them, different from their usual tense silences. This one was filled with unspoken emotions, Ara's gratitude, Kayan's quiet concern, and the lingering, unanswered questions about the past. "About your mother, Arati." Kayan began, his voice hesitant, as if unsure whether to broach the subject. Ara tensed, her earlier questions rushing back. "It's complicated," he said, staring at the tiled floor. "There are things Diva mother doesn't want brought to light. But it's in my mother, Kayan," Ara insisted, her voice pleading. "I have a right to know." Kayan sighed, deep, weary sound. "I know. And maybe someday I can tell you. But not now. Not like this." He looked at her, his eyes holding a flicker of something that looked like sympathy. "For now, let's just focus on your father's recovery." Ara wanted to press him, to demand answers. But looking at his tired face, at the genuine concern he had shown for her father, she found herself hesitating. Maybe he was right. Maybe now wasn't the time. Her childhood memories of her mother were faint, like faded photographs. She remembered a gentle voice singing her lullabies, warm hands braiding her hair, the smell of sampaguita in their small garden. But there was also a lingering sadness, a shadow she couldn't quite grasp. Did it have something to do with the Montemayor's? With Kayan? The tension-filled hallway talk didn't provide answers, only more questions. But it also revealed a side of Kayan she hadn't expected. A Kayan who was capable of care, of action, of a quiet strength that belied his cold exterior. As dawn approached, the doctor finally came out with good news: Mang Cardo was stable. The heart attack was mild, and with proper rest and medication, he was expected to make a full recovery. Relief washed over Ara, so potent it made her knees wake. She started to tears of exhaustion and gratitude. Beside her, Kuya Miguel was also emotional, thanking Kayan profusely. Kayan simply nodded, then looked at Ara. "He'll be fine," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Ara felt a teeny, fragile seed of something other than anger or fear towards Kayan Montemayor. It was a confusing mix of gratitude, curiosity, and a reluctant, almost imperceptible, stirring of something else. Lungkot still lingered, for her father's health, for the unanswered questions about her mother. But now, it was mixed with a faint glimmer of could it be hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, Kayan wasn't the monster she had painted him to be. The mystery of her mother's past remained, a dark cloud hanging over them. And Kayan, it seemed, held the key. But would he ever unlock it? Or was he, too, prisoner of his family's secrets? Mang Cardo's recovery was slow but steady. Kayan, true to his word, shouldered all the hospital expenses, a fact that both relieved and unsettled Ara. Utang na loob. It was a heavy burden, one she wasn't sure how she could ever repay, especially given the arrangement. During her father's confinement, Ara saw more of Kayan's unexpected side. He would visit Mancardo regularly, not with the stiff formality of a Montemayor here, but with a quiet respect that surprised her. He'd bring fruits or a newspaper, and sometimes, he and Mancardo would have surprisingly normal conversations about farming techniques or the weather, topics Kayan seemed genuinely knowledgeable about. Ara would often find them in mid-conversation, her father actually smiling, a rare sight these days. This Kayan, the one who could talk about soil levels and irrigation with an old farmer, was a stark contrast to the cold professor and the reluctant Fiant. It was confusing. Ayaw niyang umasa. Ayaw niyang isipin na may pagbabago. But her heart, a stubborn, foolish thing, kept whispering, baka naman may mabuti rin pala sa kanya. Doña Lucinda, predictably, was less than pleased with Kayan's unnecessary involvement with Ara's family. You're spending too much time and money on those people, she'd admonished Kayan during one of her brief, obligatory hospital visits. Remember your position, Kayan. And remember hers. Kayan, for once, had stood up to his mother, albeit quietly. He is Ara's father, mother. And soon, you thy father-in-law. It is his responsibility. The conviction in his voice had stunned both Ara and Doña Lucinda into silence. A few weeks later, Mancardo was discharged. Life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy, or at least, that new normal of Ara's forced engagement. Doña Lucinda, ever the strategist, decided it was time to showcase her future daughter-in-law's dedication to the community. She assigned Ara and Kayan to work together on a small farm project for one of her charity initiatives, developing a model organic vegetable farm on a small, unused plot of Montemayor land, the produce of which would supposedly go to a local orphanage. Ara was skeptical about Doña Lucinda's altruism, but she couldn't deny her interest in the project itself. This was her field, her passion. At ang makatrabaho si Kayan dito, it was both daunting and strangely intriguing. The first few days at the farm plot were awkward. They worked mostly in silence, Ara focusing on soil preparation and seed selection, Kayan, surprisingly, getting his hands dirty, helping with tilling and setting up simple irrigation system. He was a fast learner, asking intelligent questions, his academic mind quickly grasping the practical aspects of farming. One sweltering afternoon, while they were planting seedlings, Ara stumbled, nearly dropping a tray of delicate tomato sprouts. Kayan, who was working beside her, reached out instinctively, his hand brushing hers as he steadied the tray. A jolt, like a small electric shock, shot up Ara's arm. Their eyes met. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. There was something in his gaze, a warmth, a vulnerability, that made her breath catch. He quickly pulled his hand away, faint flush creeping up his neck. Ara's heart hammered against her ribs. That hand-touch moment, was it just an accident? Or was there something more? Slowly, tentatively, they started to talk. Not about the engagement, or their families, or the suffocating expectations, but about the farm, about their shared interest in agriculture. Ara found herself explaining her thesis to him, her passion for sustainable farming evident in her voice. Kayan listened intently, asking insightful questions, offering surprisingly practical suggestions. You really love this, don't you? Kayan observed one day, as they were inspecting a row of newly sprouted peche. Ara smiled, the genuine, unforced smile. Mula bata pa ako, ito na ang mundo ko. Seeing something grow from tiny seed, nurturing it, then harvesting it, there's a different kind of fulfillment in that. I can see that, Kayan said, his eyes soft as he watched her. You light up when you talk about it, see. Ara felt her cheeks warm. Was that a compliment? From Ken Montemayor. They even laughed together for the first time. It happened when a stray goat wandered onto their plot and started munching on their newly planted lettuce. Their initial panic quickly turned into a comical chase scene, both of them slipping and sliding in the mud, trying to shoo away the persistent goat. When they finally managed to herd it out, they were both breathless, muddy, but laughing. Real, uninhibited laughter. In that moment, covered in mud, under the hot sun, they weren't the Montemayor here and the farmer's daughter. They were just Kyan and Ara, two people sharing a moment of unexpected joy. Ara started to see Kyan in a new light. She saw his dedication, his quiet intelligence, his surprising gentleness. She saw the passion he had for learning, for understanding. And she started to admire him, not as a professor or an here, but as a man. A man who, like her, seemed to be searching for something more. Kyan, too, was changing. The cold facade was slowly cracking. He found himself looking forward to their days at the farm, to Ara's infectious enthusiasm, her quiet strength, her surprising wit. He found himself falling for her. Silently, unexpectedly, but undeniably. Yung paghanga niya sa tapang at talino ni Ara, napapalitan na ng mas malalim na emosyon. Pero ang pag-asa, minsan, mapanlin lang. Doña Lucinda, pleased with the progress of the farm project, and the positive G it was generating for her, decided to throw a lavish pre-engagement party at the mansion. It was supposed to be a celebration of Ara and Kyan's blossoming love and their shared passion for community service. Ara cringed at the hypocrisy, but she had no choice but to play along. The party was as ostentatious as expected. Manila's elite, local politicians, business associates of the Montemayors, everyone who was anyone was there. Ara, in another ridiculously expensive gown, felt like an imposter. Kyan, looking dashing in his formal suit, stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her waist, gesture that felt both possessive and protective. He even managed few convincing smiles for the cameras. They were in the middle of a stilted conversation with a fawning congressman when new arrival caused a stir. A woman, stunningly beautiful in a red, figure-hugging dress, glided into the room, her eyes fixed on Kyan. "Kyan, darling. I'm so glad made it," her voice, a sultry purr, cut through the polite chatter. Kyan froze. The color drained from his face. Ara felt his hand on her waist tighten, almost painfully. The woman sauntered towards them, an air of confidence and ownership surrounding her. "Don't you look surprised to see me, Kyan, you my love?" She turned to Ara, her smile a little too bright, a little too sharp. "And you must be. Ara, is it? Kyan has told me so little about you." The emphasis on "so little" was not lost on Ara. "Clarissa," Kyan finally managed, his voice trained. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Clarissa loud, a tinkling, theatrical sound. "Well, I'm here for Elvi Fiant, of course." She looped her arm through Kyan's, pressing herself against him. "Did you really think you could have a party and not invite me, Kyan? After all we've been through?" "Fiant?" Ara's world tilted. "An old flame?" "No," she said, "Fiance. As in, present tense." The crowd gasped. Doña Lucinda, who had been observing from the distance, looked furious. Clarissa turned to the stunned guests, her voice ringing with confidence. "For those of you who don't know, I am Clarissa de Villa. And Kyan Montemayor," she announced, tightening her grip on Kyan's arm, "is still very much as defiant. This disengagement to Miss Alcantara," she gestured dismissively at Ara, "is nothing but a temporary misunderstanding. Isn't that right, darling?" She looked up at Kyan, her eyes demanding his confirmation. Ara stared at Kyan, her heart shattering into a million pieces. Confusion. Selos. Betrayal. Lahat naghalo-halo. Kyan looked like he had seen a ghost, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and guilt. All the progress they had made, the shared laughter, the tentative connection, the budding hope, it all crumbled to dust. Was this the reason for his coldness? For his reluctance? Was he still in love with this woman? Was their arranged marriage just a way for him to appease his mother while he waited for his real fiance? "Ayoko nang umasa." She had told herself that so many times. Pero bakit? Bakit umasa pa rin siya? Bakit siya naniwala, kahit konti lang, na baka pwede? Baka totoo. The triumphant, possessive look in Clarissa's eyes, Kian's stunned silence, Doña Lucinda's thunderous expression. It was too much. Ara felt the familiar sting of tears, but she blinked them back. Not here. Not in front of these people. Not in front of her. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Ara gently but firmly removed Kian's hand from her waist. She took a step back, her face a mask of composure, though inside, she was screaming. The beautiful, fragile bubble of hope had burst. And Ara was left, once again, with nothing but the bitter taste of confusion and a heart that ached with a pain so sharp, it stole her breath away. The ballroom, moments ago filled with polite chatter and music, was now suffocatingly silent. Lahat ng mata, nakatutok sa kanila, kay Kian, kay Clarissa na parang ahas na nakapulupot sa braso niya, at kay Ara, na pakiramdam niya ay unti-unting dinudurog ng mga tingin nila. Betrayal. Yun ang salitang umalingaw sa isip niya. How could Kian do this to her? After everything. Yung mga sandaling akala niya ay nagkakalapit na sila, yung mga ngiti, yung pag-aalala kasinungalingan lang ba lahat yun? Without a word, Ara turned and walked away. Hindi niya alam kung saan siya pupunta, basta kailangan niyang makaalis doon. Bawat hakbang, parang may tinik na tumutusok sa puso niya. Narinig niya ang boses ni Kian na tinatawag siya, Ara. Wait. Let me explain. Pero hindi siya lumingon. Explain what? Na may iba siyang fiancé? Na ginamit lang siya. She found herself running, out of the mansion, out into the cool night air, her ridiculously expensive gown trailing behind her like a cruel joke. Hindi niya alam kung paano, pero narating niya yung pamilyar na Rizal, yung palayan kung saan sila nagtatrabaho ni Kian sa farm project. Doon, sa ilalim ng buwan, sa gitna ng mga usbong na palay, finally, bumuhos ang mga luhang kanina pa niya pinipigilan. Sakit. Poor, unadulterated sakit. It wasn't just the humiliation of being publicly discarded. It was the pain of a shattered hope, betrayed trust. Umasa siya, kahit konti. At ngayon, sinampal siya ng katotohanan. Ah! Narinig niya ulit ang boses ni Kian, this time closer. Nakasunod pala ito sa kanya. He was breathless, his formal suit disheveled, his eyes filled with desperate urgency. Ara, please, listen to me, Kian pleaded, reaching for her arm. Ara recoiled as if burned. Don't touch me, she cried, her voice raw with pain. Anong i-explain mo, Kian? Na all this time, may iba ka pala? Na iyong arranged marriage natin, palabas lang lahat yun para pagtakpan yung totoo mong relasyon. No. That's not true. Kian insisted. Clarissa and we were engaged, yes. Years ago. But it ended. Matagal na. Don't know why she's here, why she's saying those things. Talaga ba, Kian? Ara challenged, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. Kasi yung tingin niya sa'yo, yung paraan ng paghawak niya sa'yo, hindi yung tingin ng isang ex na naka-move on na. At ikaw? Bakit hindi ka makapagsalita kanina? Bakit hindi mo siya itinanggi? Kian ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of frustration and anguish. I was shocked, Ara. Didn't expect her to show up. And if my mother, you know how she is. She probably invited Clarissa to stir things up. Your mother. Ara scoffed. So, kasalanan na naman ng nanay mo. Palagi na lang ba siyang excuse mo, Kian? Kasi kung totoo yung sinasabi mo, kung matagal na kayong tapos ni Clarissa, bakit ang sakit-sakit pa rin? Her voice broke, the question hanging heavy in the air, a testament to the depth of her own unexpected feelings for him. Kung totoo, bakit ang sakit? Bakit siya nasasaktan ng ganito kung wala lang dapat yun sa kanya? Before Kian could answer, another voice, cold and commanding, cut through the night. Ara Alcantara! How dare you create scene and embarrass my son? Doña Lucinda! Nakasunod din pala ito, kasama si Clarissa na ngayon ay may ngiting tagumpay sa mga labi. Mother, please, Kian said, turning to Doña Lucinda. This is between me and Ara. Between you and Ara? Doña Lucinda logged a harsh, grating sound. There is no you and Ara anymore, Kian. Hindi mo ba nakikita? This girl, she's a liability. A gold digger. Look at her, causing scandal. Clarissa, on the other hand, she's from a good family. She understands our world. She is the perfect match for you. That's not true, mother. My engagement with Clarissa is over. Kian insisted, his voice rising. Oh, is it, darling? Clarissa purred, stepping forward. Because seem to recall you begging me to come back just a few months ago. Or have you forgotten? She produced her phone, a smug look on her face. I even have your messages, Kian. Shall I show them too? Ara. Kian paled. Ara felt her heart sink even further. Messages? Begging her to come back. So, he was lying. Enough of this charade. Doña Lucinda declared, her eyes glinting with triumph. This arranged marriage, it was a mistake. A temporary solution to a problem that Clarissa's return has now conveniently solved. She looked at Ara, her expression disdainful. You are no longer needed, Ara Alcantara. The deal is off. Mother, you can't do this. Kian protested, his voice desperate. Oh, I can, and will, Doña Lucinda said coolly. And to make sure you understand the consequences of defying me, Kian, your brother, Miguel, is fired. Effective immediately. He is to vacate his quarters on Viland Givay tomorrow. Ara gasped. Her Kuya Miguel fired. Dahil sa kanya? Guilt, sharp and swift, pierced through her pain. This was her fault. If she hadn't hoped, if she hadn't let herself feel. Doña Lucinda, wag po. Ara pleaded, her anger forgotten, replaced by desperate fear for her family. Parang awa niyo na po, wag niyo pong idamay ang pamilya ko. It's too late for pleading, child, Doña Lucinda said, her voice like ice. You made your bed. Now lie in it, see. She turned to Kian. As for you, Kian, you will apologize to Clarissa, and we will announce your renewed engagement tomorrow. Am I clear? Kian looked from his mother's implacable face, to Clarissa's triumphant smirk, and then to Ara, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of pain, betrayal, and now, crushing guilt. He looked utterly defeated. Ara couldn't bear it anymore. The pain, the lies, the manipulation, her family being punished because of her, it was too much. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unclasped the ridiculously expensive diamond necklace Doña Lucinda had forced her to wear, symbol of their sham engagement. Then, she pulled off the heavy engagement ring from her finger. It felt like lead. She walked towards Kian, her movement stiff, her face devoid of emotion. She held out the necklace and the ring. Salamat sa lahat, Kian, she said, her voice surprisingly calm, though her heart was screaming. Salamat sa pagpapanggap. She dropped the jewelry into his unresisting hand. The metal felt cold against his skin. Sana maging masaya ka sa kanya. Without another look at him, or at Doña Lucinda, or at Clarissa, Ara turned and walked away, back towards the dark, empty rice field. This time, Kian didn't follow. She didn't know how long she walked, her bare feet sinking into the mud, her borrowed gown tearing on the raw stalks of palay. Eventually, she collapsed onto Tpilapil, her body racked with sobs. Sakit. Guilt. Pagkalito. Yung twist ng mga pangyayari, yung biglaang pagbaliktad ng mundo niya. Kung totoo ang sinabi ni Clarissa, na pinipilit siyang balikan ni Kian, then all his previous actions, his kindness, his concern, were they all just part of an elaborate lie? Or was Clarissa the one lying, manipulating the situation? And Kian Levis, didn't he fight harder? Else did he look so guilty when Clarissa mentioned the messages? Ara didn't know what to believe anymore. All she knew was that her heart was broken, her family was in trouble again, and she was utterly, completely alone. As the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, painting the earth in hues of gray and a somber pink, Ara saw a figure walking away from the Montemayor mansion. It was Kian. He was carrying a small duffel bag. He didn't look back. He was leaving. He had chosen. Or perhaps, he had finally been broken by his mother. Ara watched him go, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. She had given back the ring, symbolically ending their farce of an engagement. But deep inside, a small, foolish part of her had hope he would choose her, fight for her. But he didn't. He just walked away. Kung totoo ang naramdaman niya para kay Kian, kahit yung mumunting pag-asa, bakit ganito kasakit ang kapalit? Dingit-ngit sa dibdib niya, parang walang katapusan. She had lost everything. Her family's security, her own fragile hope for happiness, and the man who, despite everything, had somehow managed to touch her heart. The days following the disastrous party and Kian's departure were a blur of quiet despair for Ara. True to her word, Doña Lucinda had made their lives even more difficult. Kuya Miguel was officially jobless, and the threat of eviction loomed over them again, heavier this time because Ara knew there would be no more deals, no more saviors. Mang Cardo, though recovering physically, was burdened by deep sadness and guilt, blaming himself for their family's predicament. Ara, however, refused to crumble. The sakit was still there, dull ache in her chest whenever she thought of Kian, but it was now mixed with a simmering determination. Hindi siya papatalo. She found extra work tutoring some high school students in the bayan, her earnings barely enough to make ends meet, but it was something. She also started tending to a small vegetable patch behind their house, applying the knowledge she'd gained from her studies and from working with Kian on the farm project. The memory brought a fresh pang of pain, but she pushed it away. She hadn't heard anything from or about Kian since he walked away from the mansion. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. Doña Lucinda was surprisingly quiet too, though Ara knew it was just a calm before another storm. Clarissa, Ara heard through the barangay grapevine, had also left town, reportedly frustrated with Kian's disappearance. Good riddance, Ara thought, though a small, traitorous part of her wondered if Kian had gone after her. The thought was a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. One sweltering afternoon, Ara was on her way home from the bayan, riding a jam-packed jeepney. May narinig siyang usapan sa likuran niya. Nakita mo ba yung bagong teacher sa public high school sa kabilang bayan? Yung agrikultura ang tinuturo, sabi ng isang ale. Ay, ang gwapo no. At mukhang matalino. Galing daw Maynila iyon pero piniling magturo dito sa probinsya. Sabi nila, mayaman daw yun dati pero tinalikuran ang lahat para sa simpleng buhay. Ara's ears perked up. Isang bagong agriculture teacher. From Manila. Mayaman dati. Could it be? No, impossible. Alvi would Kian Montemayor, here to Hacienda, choose to teach in a small, underfunded public school. But the thought nagged at her. The next day, driven by curiosity she couldn't explain, or perhaps, a foolish, lingering pag-asa, Ara found an excuse to visit the neighboring town. Sabi niya sa itay niya, may kukunin lang siyang agricultural pamphlets mula sa municipal hall. The public agricultural school was a modest compound of old, slightly dilapidated buildings, surrounded by demonstration plots teeming with vegetables and fruit trees. It was far aside from the polished, air-conditioned halls of Kian's former university. And there, under the shade of a large mango tree, surrounded by a group of eager high school students in their faded blue uniforms, was Kian. Her breath hitched. It was him. He was dressed simply, in plain polo shirt and denim pants, his hair slightly tousled beside the wind. He was animatedly explaining something to the students, genuine, enthusiastic smile on his face, smile Ara had never seen before. He looked different. Lighter. Happier. Parang nabunutan ng tinik. The children were waving their hands, asking questions, their faces bright with interest. Kian answered each one patiently, his voice clear and engaging. He wasn't a cold, aloof professor anymore. He was a teacher. A good one, it seemed. Ara watched from the distance, hidden behind a row of overgrown bougainvillea, her heart confused mess of emotions. Gulat, lungkot, at isang hindi maipaliwanag na warmth. Bakit? Bakit nandito siya? As the class ended and the students started to disperse, chattering happily, Kyan gathered his notes. Ara took deep breath and stepped out from her hiding place. Kyan. He looked up and his smile faltered. Surprise, then a flicker of something unreadable, pain. Regret crossed his face. Ara, he said, his voice quiet. Anong ginagawa mo dito? Ako dapat ang magtanong yan, Ara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Anong ginagawa mo dito? Teaching. In a public school. Kyan shrugged, a greedy smile playing on his lips. People change, Ara. Or maybe they just finally find where they truly belong. He gestured to the students who were now waving goodbye to him. This is better. More real. An awkward silence fell between them. The sounds of the school, children laughing, the distant bell ringing, filled the air. Kamusta na si Mang Cardo? Kyan asked, his voice softening. Okay na siya, Ara said. Nakaka-recover na. Salamat ulit sa tulong mo noon. Kyan just nodded. Bakit ka umalis, Kyan? Ara finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind for weeks. Bakit hindi ka lumaban? Kyan looked away, his gaze drifting towards the distant mountains. There are battles you can't win, Ara. Lalo na kung ang kalaban mo, sarili mong ina. And sometimes walking away is the only way to save what's left of yourself. He paused. And maybe to save the people you care about from getting caught in the crossfire. Was he referring to her? To her family? Pero yung sinabi ni Clarissa. Yung mga text messages Ara couldn't help but ask. The celos, the doubt, still lingered. Kyan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Clarissa has always been manipulative. Yes, there were messages. Months ago, when it was at the lowest, feeling trapped, I might have said things out of desperation, things didn't fully mean. But never begged her to come back, Ara. That part, she twisted. If a relationship with her ended long before you and I were forced together. He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading for her to believe him. You have to believe me. Ara searched his eyes. There was pain there, yes, but also a raw sincerity she hadn't seen before. Could it be true? Was Clarissa lying? Was Doña Lucinda using Clarissa to break them apart? The thought was both relieving and infuriating. Kian, Ara said softly, nung gabing umalis ka may iniwan kang sulat sa ilalim ng unan ko. I only found it a few days ago. This was a lie. There was no letter. But she needed to know. She needed to hear it from him, without the pressure, without the drama. What were his true feelings? Kyan looked at her, confused. Sulat. Anong sulat? Ara's heart sank a little. So, there really was no letter. But she pressed on, her voice trembling slightly. Isang sulat sinabi mo doon na yung pag-aalaga mo sa itay, yung tulong mo sa amin hindi yun dahil sa awa. O dahil sa utang na loob. Kundi dahil may pakialam ka talaga. Totoo ba yun, Kian? Kyan stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a soft smile touched his lips, the same genuine, warm smile she had seen him give his students. Kung may sulat mang ganun, Ara, he said, his voice gentle, lahat ng nakasulat doon, totoo. Ara's breath hitched. Her eyes welled up. Hindi man niya narinig ang eksaktong mga salita na gusto niyang marinig, pero sapat na iyon. Sapat na yung sincerity sa mga mata niya, yung lambot sa boses niya. He did care. His actions were never out of pity. She didn't know what to say. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they were still there, but they were slowly being overshadowed by a fragile, hesitant pag-asa. Kailangan ko nang umalis, Ara finally said, her voice a little shaky. hinihintay na ako sa bayan. Mag-iingat ka, Ara, Kian said, his gaze lingering on her. Ara nodded. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. Then, she reached into her bayong and pulled out a small, tightly sealed glass jar. It was champorado, her ita's favorite, a recipe passed down from her late mother. She had made extra that morning. Without a word, she walked back to Kian and placed the jar on the small wooden table beside his teaching notes. Their fingers brushed for a fleeting second, sending that familiar jolt through her. Para sa'yo, she whispered, then quickly turned and walked away, her heart pounding like a drum. She didn't look back, but she could feel Kian's eyes on her. Bakit ikaw pa rin, Kian? Kahit sobrang labo mo. Kahit ang dami ng sakit. Bakit yung puso ko parang tumitibok pa rin para sa'yo? The questions remained, but this time, they were accompanied by a warmth that spread through her chest, a warmth that felt a lot like hope. Maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. Maybe, despite everything, there was still a chance for their very own, hindi man sa plano, pero tayo talaga at the moment. Life after that encounter at the agricultural school settled into a new, fragile curriculum for Ara. Nagpatuloy siya sa kanyang mga raket, sa pag-aalaga sa itay niya, at sa maliit nilang gulayan. Pero may iba na. The champorado she left for Kian was a small gesture, but it felt like a turning point. It was her way of saying, I see you. And maybe, just maybe, I'm willing to give it again. Kian, for his part, didn't immediately seek her out. But a few days later, Ara found a small sack of high-quality organic fertilizer beside their back gate, with a simple note attached, for your gulayan. Nay! Walang laman yung jar ng champorado. Kinain niya. A small smile touched Ara's lips. It was his way of reciprocating his own quiet language of care. Thus began their silent, tentative courtship, conducted through small gestures and unspoken understandings. Minsan, may makikita si Ara na isang bagong pitas na basket ng gulay mula sa school farm ni Kian sa pintuan nila. Minsan naman, mag-iiwan si Ara ng mainit na pandesal o isang termos ng kape sa table ni Kian sa ilalim ng puno ng mangga sa eskwelahan, maaga pa lang, bago pa dumating ang mga estudyante. They rarely saw each other, and when they did, it was usually a brief, almost accidental encounter in the bayan, quick nod, a dead-eye smile, fleeting glance that held a universe of unspoken emotions. The pain and mistrust from the past were still there, like faint scars, but they were slowly being overshadowed by growing sense of pag-asa and a quiet, burgeoning pagmamahalan. They were healing, separately and together, at their own pace. One sunny Saturday morning, several months later, Ara was harvesting string beans from her flourishing gulayan. Masagana ang ani niya, and she was planning to sell some of it in the local market. Bigla, may anino na tumakip sa kanya. It was Kian. He was holding a small, slightly wilting sampaguita flower, the kind street children sold. He looked nervous, his usual composure gone. Ara, he began, his voice a little shaky. Pwede ba tayong mag-usap? Ara's heart did a familiar flutter. Naman, Kian. Tungkol saan? He took a deep breath. Tungkol sa atin. He held out the sampaguita. Naalala ko, paborito to ng nanay mo. At paborito mo rin daw, sabi ng itay mo. Ara's eyes widened. Her father had talked to Kian about her mother. About her. Nag-usap kami ni Mang Cardo, Kian explained, as if reading her mind. He told me about your mother, Ara. About what really happened. About her illness, and how the mother, how Doña Lucinda, in her own twisted way, tried to help, but ended up causing more pain. He told me about the accident. It was a minor fall I had as a child, nothing serious, but my mother used it as an excuse to control things, to control your mother. Ara listened, her heart aching for the mother she barely knew, and for the father who had carried so much pain in silence. Your mother wasn't negligent, Ara, Kian said, his voice thick with emotion. She was a good woman. And in my mother she was wrong. I've spent months trying to understand her, trying to forgive her, but also trying to break free from her shadow. He looked at Ara, his eyes filled with a sincerity that melted away her remaining doubts. And I've realized, Ara, that a happiness it doesn't lie in the Montemayor name, or the hacienda, or in the mother's approval. It lies with you. He knelt on one knee, right there in the middle of Ara's humble gulayan, the wilting sampaguita held out like precious jewel. Ara Alcantara, Kian said, his voice trembling but firm. Hindi to parte ng kasunduan. Hindi to utos ng nanay ko. Hindi to dahil sa utang na loob. This is me, Kian, asking you, Ara, will you marry me? This time, dear's choice. This time, for love. Kasi mahal na mahal kita, Ara. Noon pa man, ikaw na yung pangarap ko, kahit hindi ko maamin sa sarili ko. Tears streamed down Ara's face. Tears of joy, of relief, of a love that had weathered so many storms. All the pain, the anger, the confusion they all washed away, replaced an overwhelming sense of ginhawa and pagmamahalan. Kian, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the sampaguita onto her finger, a simple, fragrant promise of a future together. It wasn't a diamond, but to Ara, it was more precious than any jewel. He stood up and pulled her into a tight embrace, and they kissed, a kiss that tasted of sunshine, earth, and a love that was finally, truly, free. Their wedding was simple, held a few weeks later in the very same farm plot where they had first started to bond, the one they had tilled together for Doña Lucinda's charity. Ngayon, it was teeming with life, with vibrant vegetables and flowers they had planted, a symbol of their own blossoming love. The local community, the farmers who had worked with Ara's father, the students Kian taught, her Kuya Miguel, who Kian had helped find a new, better job at the nearby agricultural cooperative, all pitched in to help with the preparations. It was a true fiesta atmosphere, full of laughter, music, and home-cooked food. Ara wore a simple, elegant white dress, her hair adorned with fresh sampaguita flowers. Kian, in a crisp barong, couldn't take his eyes off her. As they exchanged their vows, under an archway of woven bamboo and bougainvillea, there wasn't a dry eye in the small crowd. As part of the ceremony, instead of a unity candle or sand, Ara and Kian planted a small mango sapling together, symbolizing the new life and new hope they were building. Their hands, caked with soil, met over the young tree, promise of growth and enduring love. And then, a surprise. As the small celebration was winding down, a sleek black car pulled up at the edge of the farm. Doña Lucinda stepped out. She looked different. Softer. Her usual stern expression was replaced by something akin to regret. She didn't approach them. She just stood there, watching from afar, a lone figure under the afternoon sun. She watched as Kian twirled Ara around, as they laughed with their guests, as Mancardo, looking healthier and happier than he had in years, gave Kian a heartfelt embrace. After a few moments, Doña Lucinda turned and got back into her car, leaving as quietly as she had arrived. She didn't say a word, but her presence, her silent acknowledgement, felt like a tentative step towards healing, towards possible reconciliation in the future. Maybe, just maybe, even she could change. Later that evening, as Ara and Kian sat on a simple banig, watching the stars appear, Ara remembered the bus ride, the shared umbrella, the rain. She remembered Kian's words, walang pumipili ng kapalaran. She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Alam mo, Kian, she said softly, siguro nga, walang pumipili ng kapalaran. Pero pwede nating piliin kung sino ang gusto nating makasama habang hinaharap yun. Kian kissed the top of her head. At pinipili kita, Ara. Araw-araw. Ara pulled out a small, slightly crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It was a drawing Pia, Kian's most devoted art student from the previous story, who couldn't make it to the wedding but sent her love, and this drawing had made for them. It was a drawing of Ara and Kian, stick figures with big smiles, standing under a single umbrella, with a big, colorful rainbow arching over them. Sa ilalim, nakasulat sa childlike handwriting, Teacher Ken and Tita Ara. Happy wedding. Love, Pia. Ara chuckled, showing it to Ken. Mukhang may future artist na tayong aalagaan. Ken smiled, his heart full. Mukhang nga. Hindi man sa plano. Hindi man madali. Pero sa wakas, sila talaga. Their love story, born out of conflict and obligation, had blossomed into something real, something beautiful, something enduring. Like the seeds they had planted, their love had taken root, weathered the storms, and was now ready to bear fruit. And as they looked at Pia's simple, heartfelt drawing, they knew their future together would be filled with all the colors of the rainbow, come rain or shine.